Enter. 11:47 at night. The city doesn't sleep, it just dims. 40 floors of glass and ambition tower over Midtown, lights burning on every floor where someone is still trying to be something. On the 12th floor, up moves across polished tile, left, right, slow, steady, invisible. The man holding it has been invisible for 9 years. He knows which hallways echo. He knows which rooms smell like failure. Tonight, conference room C smells like both. Look at the whiteboard. He looks at the whiteboard, a red marker. Still warm. A correction that takes 14 seconds. 9 years of a brain that never stopped working, finally given something to work on. Doesn't hear the heels on the tile. He doesn't hear the door. He doesn't know that the woman standing behind him has just watched him do the one thing her 18 engineers couldn't. He doesn't know anything is about to change. He will. 11:47 at night. The 12th floor of Nexus AI Industries smelled like burnt ambition and 3-day-old coffee. Anthony Webb pushed his mop bucket down the hallway, wheels squeaking against polished tile, sound bouncing off glass walls and coming back at him like a question he didn't want to answer. Left. Rinse. Repeat. 3 years of this. 3 years of learning which tiles scuffed easiest, which conference rooms the engineers left the worst, which trash cans held the real evidence of how badly a project was going. Tonight the evidence was everywhere. Crumpled paper. Red marker caps without their markers. A stress ball someone had squeezed so hard it split at the seam. And the smell, sharp, metallic, the particular stench that came from 18 brilliant people failing in the same direction for 72 consecutive hours. Anthony paused at the threshold of conference room C and told himself not to look at the whiteboard. He looked at the whiteboard because of course he did, because his brain had never once in 36 years done what he told it to. MIT had called it a gift, back when gifts were still things he was allowed to have, before life decided gifts were negotiable, and everything else was not. The board covered the entire east wall. Neural network training algorithm. Labels scattered like someone had thrown a handful of letters at the wall and called it mathematics. Red marker bleeding into blue, bleeding into black. Like someone had drawn an angry face in the corner. One of those cartoon faces with the heavy eyebrows and the downward mouth, and underneath it, in handwriting that was trying to be neat and failing, 3 words. Why won't you? A stepped inside, just to get a better look, just to understand what they were working on, not to help, absolutely not to help, not his job, not his floor, not his whiteboard, not his problem. His eyes found line 47. Oh no, activation function, linear. Straight, flat, merciless line cutting through a problem that needed to curve. It was the kind of mistake that looked right if you were tired enough, and staring at the same equations long enough that your eyes started reporting fiction as fact. He'd made similar mistakes once, in a different life, a version of himself that wore real shoes and slept in a real bed and had a reason to show up to class on a Tuesday morning. His hand moved before his brain filed the necessary paperwork, plucked up the red marker, still warm from whoever threw it down in defeat, probably 2 hours ago, probably after a meeting that ended with someone's fist on the table. Stop, Anthony. Stop right now. You clean. That's what they pay you $17. Hour to do. Not this. Never this. But his hand was already erasing, drawing the sigmoid curve where the straight line used to be. His brain, traitor that it was, I already mapped the whole correction before he'd consciously decided to make it. Swap these 2 variables, they were reversed, which would cascade errors all the way through training. Add regularization here because the model was overfitting, thanks to memorizing instead of learning, like a student who could recite the textbook word for word without understanding a single sentence of it, which was its own kind of tragedy, which Anthony understood more than he'd ever say out loud. Stepped back, looked at what he'd done, told himself it was fine, nobody would know. Engineers left whiteboards like this all the time, covered in corrections and second guesses from overnight cleaning staff who also happened to hold the knowledge of trained mathematicians, locked somewhere behind years of survival and grief and $17. 50 an hour, happens all the time, that should fix it. The voice came from directly behind him, calm, quiet. The kind of quiet that wasn't the absence of power. It was power choosing not to announce itself because it didn't need to. Anthony's spine turned to ice. He spun. Jessica Cole stood 10 feet away. CEO of Nexus AI Industries, 38 years old. Black Armani suit, deep navy, fitted with the precision of something chosen rather than bought. Hair natural and close-cropped, the kind of cut that took confidence to wear in a boardroom full of people looking for something to comment on. Eyes large and slightly almond-shaped, light, dark gray-brown with amber flecks that caught the overhead light in a way that was genuinely unusual. The kind of eyes that made people forget what they were about to say. He's holding an iPad and a plain white coffee cup that had probably cost more than his shoes. She was not looking at Anthony. She was looking at the whiteboard, and her fingers were moving across the iPad screen. Fast, no wasted motion. Like she typed the way other people breathed. Anthony's mouth opened. Nothing came out. He tried again. I wasn't trying to. I just noticed. I can erase it. I'll erase it right now. I wasn't. Stop talking. He stopped talking. 10 seconds. 15. He counted his heartbeats. Tried to remember if the custodial service contract had a clause about unauthorized use of company equipment. Tried to remember if markers counted as equipment. Tried to remember if Lily was going to have to change schools again because her father couldn't keep his hands off other people's math problems at midnight. 20 seconds. Jessica Cole's expression shifted. Barely. A micro movement that crossed her face and left almost no trace. But Anthony had spent 3 years learning to read rooms, learning to notice the things that people didn't know they were showing. And he caught it. A reduction 67%. Flat. Factual. Reading it off her iPad screen like a stock ticker. Inference speed up 43%. She turned and looked at him, not at the uniform, not at the mop he'd left in the hallway, at him. People looked at equations, searching for the variable that didn't fit, the number that shouldn't be there but was, the answer that changed everything about the problem. Name, Anthony Webb. Position, night maintenance. 9 to 6 shift, education? And there it was. The question that always felt like stepping on a stair that wasn't there, the lurch in the chest. The half second of free fall, MIT. He said it the way you said things that used to be true. 8 out, junior year, why? Drop dirt. No softness around it, personal reasons. He didn't elaborate, didn't mention Diana. The leukemia diagnosis that arrived on a Wednesday like ordinary mail. The NICU, scholarship office that was very sorry, very understanding, but really did need him to complete the semester to maintain eligibility. 6 months of trying to do both, be at the hospital and be at school, until his body and his grades both collapsed in the same week. The 9 years that followed, not falling exactly, more like a long controlled descent, above his head so she didn't hit the ground. He didn't say any of that. Jessica Cole studied him. 5 full seconds. Didn't blink once. Tomorrow, 8 a.m. conference C observer role. Anthony's brain stalled. Right, ma'am, I have my daughter I need to arrange. There's a children's lounge 2 doors down. Tablets. Snacks. I don't think I should, Mr. Webb. She let his name hang there, not as a threat, as a period. End of that sentence. Think of a different one. Her heels clicked against the tile. Each step deliberate, unhurried, the walk of someone who had decided long ago exactly how to cross a room and had never reconsidered. Days gone before Anthony could form a sentence that wasn't either an apology or a panic. He stood there, heart hammering, staring at the whiteboard, at the red marker corrections that looked, with particular loneliness of the empty conference room, less like mathematics and more like a message he'd written to himself 9 years ago and was only now receiving. What in the world just happened? 12:30 in the morning, Angela James opened the door before Anthony knocked, which she always did, which had stopped surprising him about 18 months ago. She was 58 years old, figured and soft in the way of someone who spent her life taking care of people, with silver hair pulled into a neat low bun and small pearl studs in her ears. Her apartment always smelled like something good cooling on the counter. Tonight, potato pie. Something floral underneath it that Anthony had never been able to identify. CEO woman called here looking for you. Angela's eyes were doing the thing, the too knowing, a concerned thing she did when his rent was late or when Lily came home with holes in her shoes. Left a voicemail. Said to bring Lily tomorrow at 8. Said there's a lounge for children. Anthony opened his mouth. She called you, quite specific. She called my neighbor. he said it slowly. At midnight, 11:53, technically, Anthony stood in the doorway and tried to process this. The CEO had somehow obtained his neighbor's phone number and used it to relay a meeting notice on a Wednesday night, which was either the most efficient thing he'd ever heard or the most alarming thing, possibly both in a ratio he hadn't figured out yet. Lily was asleep on Angela's sofa, 6 years old. Pink dress with yellow daisies, the Goodwill one she wore to everything, birthday parties and grocery runs, and apparently now to neighbors' apartments while her father worked nights, and the world continued being complicated. Mr. Hoppy was clutched under her left arm. A stuffed rabbit had one ear. The other had been loved clean off sometime around Lily's 3rd birthday, and the flat patch of fabric where the ear used to be had become, somehow, the most important part of the whole animal. Diana had bought it 2 days before the surgery that was supposed to be routine. Anthony lifted Lily carefully. She stirred, murmured something that sounded like his name or maybe nothing at all, settled her head against his chest with the absolute faith of a child who had never once doubted that his arms were the safest place in the world. He carried her home, 10 steps between Angela's door and his. He counted them every night. They felt like a different kind of distance. His apartment in Vine City was 1 bedroom. Lily had the bedroom. He slept on the sofa, a sectional he'd bought off Craigslist for $50, cushions soft in the wrong places, letted burn on the far armrest he'd covered with a throw pillow. He'd told himself he'd get a proper bed frame eventually. Eventually kept getting postponed. He settled Lily into her bed. The twin mattress on the low frame, clean sheets, a comforter with cartoon planets. And watched her for a moment. She was getting heavier, growing up. Time kept moving whether he wanted it to or not. He went to the sofa and looked at the water stain on the ceiling that he'd decided, around month 3 of living here, looked like the state of Georgia if you tilted your head. Or a dragon, depended entirely on his mood. Tonight it looked like Georgia, his brain, and never once agreed to stop working just because the rest of him needed to, ran through the options. Aunt 1. This was a test. Jessica Cole had come back to the office for forgotten keys, an unauthorized correction on a critical project whiteboard, and tomorrow he would walk into that conference room and be formally terminated in front of witnesses. Option 2. This was a trap, was collecting evidence so she could prove it was sabotage, claim he'd deliberately misled the engineers, and terminate him for cause. Option 3, and this one he barely let himself look at directly. I didn't look directly at something bright. This was real. This was someone seeing him, actually seeing him, not the uniform, not the 9 years of choices made under duress him. He looked at Diana's photo, like dollar store frame on the shelf he'd built from 2 stacked milk crates. Diana smiling, hospital gown, hair wrapped, holding newborn Lily, with the careful, terrified joy of someone who couldn't believe she was trusted with something this precious. I'd taken the photo at 2:14 in the afternoon. He remembered the exact time because he'd checked his watch right before, thinking, I need to anchor this. Something is shifting, and I want to know exactly where I was standing when it did. Hours later, the bleeding started. By morning, he was a father alone in a hallway, and Diana was a photograph, and MIT was a different life, and everything else was just what came next, whether he was ready or not. What would you tell me to do right now, Diana? He could almost hear her. Not words exactly, more like her particular quality of silence, the kind she used when she thought he was overthinking something, building scenarios in his head, and she would just look at him with that specific tilt of her head and say, Anthony, stop thinking, start moving. He closed his eyes, 2:47 a.m. before sleep came. Lily sat up in her bed and looked at him with the expression of someone who had not yet decided whether they were in a good mood. Her hair went in 4 different directions, 1 sock on, 1 sock somewhere in the blankets. It's not Saturday. It's not Saturday, Anthony agreed. Then why are you in here? Because we have something special today. The mood decision landed. Good, immediately and completely. Only 6-year-olds could shift from suspicious to ecstatic in under a second. She sat up fast enough that she swayed. What kind of special? You're going to see where Daddy works. The night place? The building, yeah. During the day, already reaching for Mr. Hoppy, which meant the negotiation phase was over, and the logistics phase had begun. "Can I wear my princess dress?" "You can wear whatever you want," which he would come to understand. Approximately 45 minutes later, it meant the pink dress with yellow daisies. The same dress she'd worn last week and the week before, and to Angela's birthday dinner, and to the pediatrician, and to the Kroger where the cashier had called her sweetheart. And Lily had solemnly informed him that her name was Lily Diana Webb, and that he should probably know that. The bathroom mirror in Anthony's apartment was slightly too small, mounted slightly too high, which meant he had to tilt his head back to see his own face. He'd been meaning to rehang it since he moved in. He had not rehung it. Shaved with a razor that had gone one use past its actual limit. The blade dragged. He pressed too hard near his jaw and hissed. A thin red line along the left side of his neck, already fading by the time he rinsed white button-down shirt. His best one. His only one, if he was being honest, the others having gradually downgraded to undershirts or cleaning rags. There was a coffee stain on the left cuff that had survived 4 washes with increasing stubbornness, settling into the fabric like it had claims. Khaki pants from the Goodwill on Simpson Street, $8. The waistband still had ghost residue from the price tag. A faint oval of adhesive that nothing had fully removed shows. Black loafers, dress shoes he owned. The left sole was separating at the toe. He'd run a bead of superglue along it 3 times. It stayed closed for approximately 4 days each time, before peeling back like it was making a point. Looked at himself in the too small mirror. A man going to a meeting he had no business attending. A man who had corrected a whiteboard at midnight in a building where he was paid to clean the floors. A man wearing a shirt with a coffee stain and shoes that were losing an argument with gravity. Lily appeared in the doorway behind him. Pink dress, white tights with a small hole near the left ankle. Mary Jane's that had belonged to someone else first, polished to a respectful shine because Lily cared about things being taken care of even if they weren't new. Her hair was brushed. She'd done it herself, which meant it was mostly brushed, one section near the back that had made its own decisions. She looked at him in the mirror. "You look handsome, Daddy." Anthony's throat did something complicated. "Thanks, kiddo." She came in and hugged him from behind, laid face pressed between his shoulder blades, Mr. Hoppy's remaining ear poking up past his elbow. She smelled like the store-brand shampoo he bought in the big bottles, and like sleep, and like something that was just hers, just Lily. A particular smell of the best thing he'd ever accidentally done right. He reached back and patted her head. "Okay, let's go do this thing." AM, Nexus AI Industries occupied floors 8 through 18 of a glass tower in Midtown Atlanta that caught the morning light and threw it back at the street like a challenge. But Anthony had walked past this building for 3 years as an employee and approximately 8 years before. That as someone who looked at buildings like this and thought someday, they'd stopped thinking someday around the time Lily started kindergarten. And he realized that someday was a word that meant nothing unless you attached a specific date to it. He held Lily's hand as they walked through the lobby. Marble floors. A piece of modern art on the east wall that was either a commentary on something or just an expensive object. People in suits moving with the particular efficiency of those who had somewhere to be and were already late for it. Lily's grip tightened on his hand. "Daddy, this place is fancy." "Yeah, baby. Very fancy. Why do they have a big rock inside?" "That's art. It doesn't look like art. A lot of things don't look like what they are." I considered this with the gravity it apparently deserved, and then nodded, satisfied. The receptionist at the front desk was young, natural hair pulled into a careful updo, makeup applied with the precision of someone who understood that appearance at this desk was part of the job. She looked up when they approached. Her eyes did the inventory, a quick scan, starting at the shoes, his left sole, the khakis, with the stain. "Up, can I help you?" "I have a meeting with Jessica Cole." Her fingers paused over the keyboard, just for a moment. The pause of someone recalibrating. "Name, Anthony Webb," she typed. Her expression shifted, controlled, professional, but not perfectly either. "Oh," a breath of sound. "You're the..." She stopped. Started again. "You're on the list, maintenance staff," Anthony said. I didn't know exactly why he said it, except that he'd learned years ago that naming the thing people were thinking was always better than letting them name it themselves. Night shift. Though apparently not just that anymore, hadn't planned to say that last part. It came out harder than he intended. The receptionist printed a badge without another word. VIP All Access. Anthony had never held a badge like this before. He'd seen them on people, and the lanyards left behind on chairs after late meetings. He'd never worn one. He clipped it to his shirt pocket, took Lily's hand, walked to the elevator. The doors closed. In the mirrored elevator panel, I could see both of them. Him in the coffee-stained shirt and the separating sole, and Lily in the pink dress with the sock with a hole, holding Mr. Hoppy's one-eared self like a talisman. Lily looked at his reflection. "Are you scared, Daddy?" I almost said no. He almost said the thing parents were supposed to say, the reassuring thing, the everything is fine thing. But Lily had a way of knowing when he was performing. I inherited Diana's gift for seeing through the performance to the actual human being underneath. A little bit. Yeah, she nodded seriously. Me too, Beat. But we're still going in, right? We're still going in. Elevator opened on 12. Conference Room C at 8 a.m. was a different organism than Conference Room C at midnight. Same glass walls, same long table, black surface reflecting the overhead lights. Same view of Midtown Atlanta beginning its morning argument with itself. But where last night the room had been defined by its failure, the crumpled paper, the angry face marker drawing, identity of frustration, now it was full of people who had presumably gone home, slept, returned, and were presenting the appearance of competence regardless of how last night had ended. 14 people. Laptops open, AirPods in, expensive watches on wrists that moved with practiced efficiency. The kind of people for whom this room was natural habitat. The kind of people who had never once questioned whether they belonged here. Anthony walked in holding Lily's hand. Ed turned. The silence had weight. Darnell Shaw was at the head of the table running through something on his laptop screen. 38 years old, lean and sharp-featured, dark brown complexion, even-toned and smooth, wearing a navy suit that cost more than Anthony's monthly expenses and a Stanford ring that he wore turned outward like a warning. He looked up, took in Anthony, took in Lily, took in the maintenance badge clipped to the coffee-stained shirt. Arranged himself into something that was technically a smile. He glanced around the table, making sure everyone was watching, making sure this landed the way he intended it to. "I think you might have the wrong room, buddy." Did what it was designed to do. Small, dismissive. The particular cruelty of informality used as a weapon, making someone feel foolish for not understanding a social code they were never taught. Anthony's jaw tightened, kept his voice level, even. The way he'd learned to keep it through 3 years of rooms where he was the help, and people said whatever they wanted because the help wasn't really listening. "Jessica Cole asked me to be here." 8 a.m. See, Darnell leaned back in his chair, hands behind his head, long pause, calculated. He looked at the colleague to his left, someone young, someone who understood exactly what was expected of him, and then back at Anthony with an expression that managed to be both amused and pitying. "Look, man, I get it. She probably said something, you probably got excited. A janitor in an executive strategy meeting?" He spread his hands. "That's a little." The door opened, and the room died, not the polite quiet of people being attentive, the specific, total absence of sound that happened before something significant, before announcements that changed things, before a person of particular consequence entered a space, and the space rearranged itself accordingly. Jessica Cole walked in, charcoal gray today, same close-cropped hair, same amber-flecked eyes moving across the room like they were cataloging it, both hands free. She'd left the iPad somewhere, and her face had the particular focus of someone who had already decided exactly how this meeting was going to go. Her eyes found Darnell. He read something in those eyes and stopped smiling. Exactly where he's supposed to be, Darnell. Quiet, factual. The tone of someone stating the boiling point of water. "Unless you'd like to use this time to explain why your team of 18 couldn't solve what Mr. Webb fixed in 5 minutes. I'm happy to make room on the agenda." Darnell's chair was suddenly very interesting to look at. A few people at the table found their laptops required urgent attention. Jessica moved to the head of the table. The other head, beside hers. The one that was left empty at every meeting Anthony had ever observed through glass walls, because it was understood that the CEO's immediate right was not a seat you occupied unless specifically asked. She gestured to it. Anthony sat, Lily climbed onto his lap. She sat there for approximately 4 seconds, taking in the room with the calm assessment of a 6-year-old who had decided to form her own opinions about everything. Jessica crouched to her level. No condescension in it, no performance, just a woman of considerable power adjusting her altitude to speak to a child at actual eye level. There's a lounge down the hall. Tablets, juice, books. Like to see it? Lily looked at Anthony, not asking permission exactly, checking coordinates. It's okay, baby. I'll come get you in an hour. Lily nodded, tucked Mr. Hoppy more firmly under her arm, laid off Anthony's lap with the dignity of someone who had somewhere to be. An assistant materialized from near the door, quiet, professional, clearly briefed, and Lily walked out with her like she'd done this before. The door closed. It was just Anthony, in a room full of people who had wanted him gone 30 seconds ago. With a CEO who had just, in front of witnesses, put him in the power seat, Jessica stood at the head of the table. She pulled out her phone, up a photo, and sent it to the projector. The whiteboard appeared on the 80-inch screen, his corrections in red, clear, deliberate. Changes that couldn't be explained away as accidental. Last night, she said, Webb corrected an error in our neural network training loop. We're going to verify his logic now. Darnell tried one more time. His voice had changed, less casual, more careful, like a man who'd read the room and was adjusting his strategy. Respect, one correction doesn't tell us. Run the model, Jessica. Run it, Darnell. The engineer at the laptop didn't look at Darnell for permission. He looked at Jessica. Then he ran it. The projector showed the training interface. Base bar, metrics updating in real time. 20 training error, down 67%. Viewflation accuracy up 44%. Inference latency down 38%. The room shifted. Particular atmospheric change of people revising their certainties. Darnell's face went through 3 colors. Someone muttered something technical. Someone else typed fast. Darnell recovered. Just barely. Could be dataset specific. To test across multiple distributions before we could call this. Then test it across multiple distributions. Anthony said it before he'd decided to say it. Calm, no edge. A voice he used when Lily was being stubborn about something. Not arguing, just stating the next logical step. Run 3 more datasets, I'll wait. I looked at him with the expression of a man who had significantly miscalculated the terrain. He ran 3 more datasets. Every single one told the same story. The room murmured, low, particular sound of smart people confronting evidence that contradicted something they'd believed. Victor Okafor had been sitting at the far end of the table. Quiet until now, 52 years old, broad and square-jawed with ebony skin, and the kind of stillness that came from a person who had nothing left to prove. He was the CTO. He had the kind of face that had carried a lot of weather. He pushed back his chair. He started clapping, slow, deliberate. Each clap its own complete statement, gentlemen. He looked around the room. And lady, he nodded at Jessica. Look, just watched is what happens when you stop asking where someone went to school and start asking what they can do. He looked at Anthony. The look wasn't pity, wasn't condescension, look of someone recognizing something in another person that they recognized in themselves. Welcome to the room, son. Some people clapped. Real, if tentative. Others sat still with their arms crossed and their faces arranged into expressions that said they were processing this information but had not yet accepted it. Darnell didn't clap. He gathered his things with the specific, light, controlled movements of a man who was furious and had decided that showing it would cost him more than swallowing it. 2 minutes later, Jessica's office on the 14th floor communicated everything about a person without saying a word. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls. Atlanta spread out below, morning light cutting across Midtown in long, warm angles. But the desk was black walnut, almost completely clear. Laptop, coffee cup, nothing else. The walls held 2 pieces of art. No diplomas, no awards. The absence of diplomas, Anthony thought, was probably itself a statement. They sat in the chair across from her. A good chair, not comfortable exactly. More like a chair designed to make you feel like the conversation you were having was important. Jessica didn't make him wait. How much do we pay you? 1750 feet an hour, she wrote something on a notepad, actual hull pen, actual paper, and slid it across the desk. Anthony picked it up, technical consultant, $94,000 per year, full benefits. Start date, Monday. He read it twice. Eyes read it a third time, without his permission. I don't have a degree, he said. Not as a complaint, as a fact that he felt she needed to have. You have something better. She leaned back. You see structure. Things break before the break propagates. That's not taught. It's either there or it isn't. I haven't worked in a technical capacity in 9 years. Also fixed in 5 minutes what 18-degreed engineers couldn't fix in 3 days. So what if I can't reproduce that? What if it was, one, luck, a beat? The small shift of someone who had heard this argument before. And that logic forward. Either you have genuine aptitude that 9 years didn't erase, in which case the answer is yes, or you got extremely lucky in a way that required specific, demonstrable knowledge of neural network architecture, activation functions, and regularization theory, in which case your luck is more sophisticated than most people's expertise. Another beat. Do we have a deal? Anthony put the paper down, and something in his chest, the part that had been quiet for 9 years, the part he'd wrapped in careful layers of practicality and responsibility, not, and this is the time. That part moved, and then he stood up. Words came out before the thought was finished. I can't accept this. Jessica's expression changed. Not dramatically, just a slight realignment of whatever she normally kept in place. I had the impression this was not a sentence she heard often. Excuse me, I appreciate it, genuinely, but I can't. Why not why with a question mark? Why is a demand for data? Because I don't belong in that room. Words came from somewhere he hadn't cleared for public access. His voice cracked slightly on belong, and he hated himself for it, but he let it crack. Those people, they spent years, they have the credentials, the experience. I'm a guy who got lucky with a marker at midnight. That's not the same thing. You just outperformed all of them, once, one time, one data point. He was talking faster now. You can't build a hire on one data point. You know that. You run models. Understand what, Mr. Webb? He stopped. I don't make offers twice. He looked at her. She looked at him. The Atlanta skyline went about its business behind her. Then I'm sorry for wasting your time. He turned toward the door, making a mistake. Quiet. Not theatrical. Anthony stopped. Didn't turn back, maybe, his hand on the doorframe. But it's mine to make, he walked out. The thing he felt, descending 14 floors in the elevator with his VIP badge still clipped to his coffee-stained shirt, was not relief. Was not confidence. But any of the things you were supposed to feel when you'd turn down a number with a comma in it on principle. It was fear. Old fear, familiar fear, the fear of a man who had talked himself out of everything good that had ever been offered to him, because the risk of wanting it was more terrifying than the certainty of not having it. He'd been doing this for 9 years. He'd gotten very good at it. Late evening, Anthony washed dishes. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 cups. Everything they owned in that category. Lily was at the small table doing something with construction paper that involved more glitter than he'd sanctioned. Apartment smelled like the pasta they'd had for dinner and the dish soap that was almost out. His phone rang. Number. Anthony Webb, Victor Okafor, CTO. A pause. Warm voice. No corporate performance in it. Liked to tell you that you are, with affection, an idiot. Anthony gripped the counter with his free hand. Sir, Victor, I told you. The kind of directness that came from someone who had earned the right to say what he thought. I need to ask you something, and I need you to actually answer instead of deflecting with humility, which from what I saw today you use like a shield. Silence. When you looked at that whiteboard last night, in the first 2 seconds, they decided anything about whether to touch it or not. What did you see? Anthony didn't think about the answer. The answer was already there. I saw a linear activation function in a context that needed non-linearity. I saw 2 transposed variables that were going to cascade errors through the entire training loop. I saw a regularization structure that wasn't going to prevent overfitting. He stopped. I saw the whole fix. In how long? 14 seconds, maybe. Ice on the other end. Then I fixed my first major engineering problem at a factory in Birmingham when I was 26. I was sweeping metal shavings for $6 an hour. A plant manager named Harold saw me reading a differential equations textbook on lunch break. You know what he did? What? Paid my first semester at Jefferson State Community College out of his own pocket. Wasn't doing me a favor. He was just refusing to let something go to waste, a beat. I got my associate's degree, then transferred to Alabama A&M, then got my master's at Georgia Tech. 11 years total. While working full-time, Anthony stood very still in his kitchen. Most people don't know that part of my story because I don't advertise it. But I remember exactly what it felt like to think I didn't belong. I remember every room where someone looked at me and made the calculation before I'd said a word. Victor paused. And I remember what it felt like when one person refused to make that calculation. I'm not. The offer stands until Friday. A clock, gentle, final. Make the decision from a real place, not a scared place. Those are different decisions, click. Anthony stood with the phone at his ear long after the call ended. Lily looked up from her construction paper, letter on her left cheek. The concentrated expression of an artist mid-project. Who was that? Someone from work? Good someone or bad someone? Anthony considered this. Set his phone on the counter, I don't know yet. Saturday morning. Oatmeal. A's oatmeal. Lily had never complained about oatmeal, not once, which was either the result of excellent character or a worrying adaptability to reduced circumstances, or probably both. She sat across from him at the IKEA table. $30. Eggs shimmed with folded cardboard, which had been the solution for so long that the shimmed leg had stopped feeling like a problem and started feeling like a feature. Anthony told her about the offer. He tried to tell it plainly, without his own fear shaping the telling. He said the number. He said what the job was. He said he'd turned it down and why. Listened with her spoon in her oatmeal and the expression she made when she was thinking hard, a slight furrow between her brows. Diana's furrow, the same geography. Why did you say no? Because I was scared. Of what? Of messing up. Not being good enough when it mattered. He turned his spoon over. Of getting you excited about something and then having to tell you it didn't work out. Lily tilted her head. That tilt, that exact tilt, Anthony's chest compressed, makes their problem. She said it with the uncomplicated confidence of someone who had not yet learned to doubt her own math. In 5 minutes, Mrs. Angela told me. She said the boss lady was very impressed. Angela shouldn't be gossiping about Daddy, gentle, patient. The particular patience of a child who had decided to manage this conversation carefully. If you were good enough to fix it, why aren't you good enough to keep fixing it? He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He looked at his daughter. 6 years old, glitter residue still on her left cheek, Mr. Hoppy propped against the salt shaker, and he did not have an answer. He had 100 answers that were actually just the same fear wearing different hats, but he did not have an actual answer to the actual question. Mommy used to say, you think too much. The oatmeal went quiet. She did say that. Lily nodded. They bite. Swallowed. So maybe stop thinking and just try. She said it the way she said everything that seemed obvious to her. Not unkindly, just as information he appeared to be missing. You can always fail after you try. I can't try after you don't. The morning light came through the kitchen window and landed on the table between them. Anthony Webb looked at his daughter and understood, with the specific clarity that only arrives when you're not expecting it. But the most important things he'd ever learned in his life had been taught to him by people he would have called unqualified to teach him. Friday, 4:45 in the afternoon, 15 minutes before the offer disappeared. He walked into the lobby of Nexus AI Industries in the same clothes he'd worn on Wednesday, the coffee-stained shirt, the khakis, with a glued sole, because he hadn't bought anything new and wasn't going to pretend this was different than it was. The receptionist looked up, recognized him. Something in her expression shifted. The recalibration again. Face of someone revising an earlier assessment. Is Jessica Cole available? She's in meetings. It's important. A pause. A call made. A brief exchange. The receptionist set down the phone. She'll see you. 14th floor. Owed the elevator up. The door to Jessica's office was open. She was at her desk, reading something on her laptop, and she didn't look up when he stepped in. You're cutting it close, Mr. Webb. I know. What changed? He stepped further into the office. He stood rather than sat. Not because he'd decided to stand, just because sitting felt like something he hadn't earned yet. My daughter asked me a question I couldn't answer. Jessica looked up. She asked me why I was more afraid of trying than I was of failing. He met her eyes, held them. I didn't have a good answer. I've been scared for 9 years, since Diana. And I'm tired of the fear making my decisions. The contract across the desk, single page, clean. The number was the same. Anthony picked up the pen. His hand was steady. He signed. Jessica stood, extended her hand across the desk. He shook it, firm. Real, welcome to Nexus AI, Mr. Webb. Nodded, started to turn toward the door, then stopped. Turned back. One condition. Jessica's eyebrow rose approximately 3 millimeters. You're not really in a position to negotiate, I know. But I need to say it anyway. She waited. They fail? Fire me. Don't keep me out of pity. Don't rearrange a role around my weaknesses or create a position that doesn't need to exist. If I can't do the work, let me go. He held her gaze. I didn't come here to be a charity case. Jessica looked at him for a long moment. The light from the window behind her made the Atlanta skyline look like something painted. Deal. The word was quiet. It had weight. Anthony Webb walked out of the 14th floor with a signed contract and a pair of shoes with a glued sole, and the particular vertigo of a man who had just chosen, for the first time in 9 years, to let himself want something. Ain't know yet whether this was courage or catastrophe. He suspected it might be both. He went to get his daughter. Monday morning arrived the way first days always did. Too fast and too bright, and carrying the specific weight of everything you'd agreed to when you were feeling brave. Anthony Webb stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor at 7:58 a.m., wearing the same white button-down. Different stain this time, a ghost ring from the iron he'd borrowed from Angela because he didn't own one, pressed into the fabric near the second button, and the khakis he'd pressed the night before by laying them under the mattress, which was something his grandfather had taught him, and which worked better than it had any right to. Left shoe sole had been reglued. Third time this month. He'd used the good adhesive, the kind in the orange tube, laid over it for 40 seconds, pressing the toe flat against the floor of his kitchen, while Lily ate cereal behind him and narrated the operation like a sports commentator, providing color analysis on a procedure of significant national importance. He told himself last night that he was ready. He was not ready. The engineering floor at 8 in the morning was a different organism than the engineering floor at 10 at night. At night, it was quiet, purposeful, earned its rhythms over 3 years. Which machines ran hot, which trash cans filled fastest, which desk belonged to the person who ate sunflower seeds and left the shells in a ring around their keyboard like a tiny fortification. Owned this floor in its sleeping state. This was not its sleeping state. 40 desks, screens everywhere. The low-frequency hum of a lot of processing happening simultaneously. Conversations in clusters, a smell of fresh coffee, and something that might have been ambition or might have been anxiety depending on the week. Probably both. Probably always both. On a Monday, nobody noticed him walk in, which was, he realized, exactly what he'd trained himself to expect, and exactly what he was going to have to unlearn. Victor Okafor's office was in the corner. Glass walls, door open, the kind of office that announced its occupant had nothing to hide. Victor was on a call, but he saw Anthony through the glass and lifted his chin, acknowledging, "Stay there 1 minute." Darnell Shaw was at the central hub of desks, running what appeared to be a morning brief. Anthony, at the same moment Anthony saw him. The brief paused, a half-second of recalibration that was long enough to be visible to everyone paying attention, which was everyone. "Oh, good." Elle's voice carried easily in the open floor plan, designed to carry the janitor's back, a beat, theatrical. Anybody spill something? A few sounds, not quite laughter. Nervous cousin of laughter, the sound people made when they weren't sure how much was safe to find funny. Anthony stood with his hands at his sides. Even, measured. Three years of cleaning up after people had taught him, among other things, responding to bait was almost always more expensive than swallowing it. Victor came out of his office, no rush in his stride, no urgency in his face. He had the ease of a man who had long ago stopped needing to hurry for drama that wasn't his. To clean anything, Darnell, mild, factual, like stating the weather. Anthony's taking the senior technical architect position. Desk next to mine, Engineering flaw did what open floors did with information like this, absorbed it in layers. Some people went still. Some people found reasons to look at their screens. Some people looked at Darnell, waiting to understand how they were supposed to feel. Darnell's face moved through 3 expressions in under a second. The third one settled into something controlled. That's a VP-level seat, and now it's his. Looked at him with eyes that were perfectly pleasant and contained absolutely zero invitation to continue. Problem? A pause that lasted exactly long enough for everyone in earshot to understand the answer Darnell was allowed to give. Oh, sir. Victor set up Anthony's laptop. Jira, access, code-based credentials. Showed him the ticket dashboard with the efficiency of a man who communicated in the minimum number of words needed to transfer the maximum amount of information. Up 1 open ticket. Client reported data corruption in a production system. No reproduction steps, no error logs worth reading. Just something is wrong, find it. 5,000 lines, Victor said. Python. Multiple contributors over 3 years. No consistent documentation style. Anthony looked at the screen, because this was the kind of problem that had a shape. Not a clear shape yet. I'd feel it the way you felt a room's dimensions in the dark. Not seeing, but knowing. I'll start at the data ingestion layer. Victor nodded. No further direction, but the trust implicit in that nod was so sudden and so complete that Anthony had to look away from it for a second. He sat down at his new desk, started reading. Darnell walked past 20 minutes later, said something to the person at the next desk, quite loud enough to be clearly directed at Anthony, not quiet enough to be accidental. Let's see how so long this lasts. The colleague didn't respond, which was its own kind of answer. Anthony kept reading. 3 hours later he walked to Victor's office, knocked on the open door frame, found it. Victor looked up. Where? Line 3194. Float 30s instead of float 64. Collision error compounds across iterations. By the time the data reaches the output layer, the rounding error has accumulated enough to corrupt the stored values. Victor pulled the code up on his second monitor. Read the line. Read the 10 lines above and below it. Looked at Anthony. 3 hours. Just under. Darnell's team had this ticket for a week. Anthony didn't say anything. The number said what it needed to say without his help. That's not luck, said quietly. Not a compliment, exactly. More like a correction, like setting a record straight that had been wrong for too long. Darnell appeared in the doorway behind Anthony. Timing that was either coincidental or wasn't. Lucky guess, Webb? He'd switched to the last name now, deployed like a small demotion. One correct read on someone else's messy code doesn't make you. Anthony turned in his chair. Looked at Darnell steadily. If you say so, just that. If you say so, a heat, no defense. The words of a man who had decided to let the work do the arguing because the work was better at it. Darnell stepped into the office. Something in his posture had changed from the morning, less performance, or something genuine and less flattering. I'm going to tell you something. Some of us actually earned our positions here. Stanford. 8 years of building this team. 8 years of fighting for every resource we got. Anthony held his eyes. Some of us are still earning ours. Every day, a beat. Sounds like we have that in common. Victor stood up from his desk in a way that managed to be unhurried and definitive simultaneously. Don't you have sprint planning in 10 minutes? It was not a question. Darnell left. The door stayed open. Victor sat back down and looked at Anthony, with an expression that was somewhere between impressed and concerned. The look of a man watching someone walk a narrow bridge and calculating the odds. He didn't say what he was thinking, but Anthony was starting to understand that Victor Okafor communicated as much in what he didn't say as in what he did. The week built itself around Anthony's presence the way structures built around new load-bearing elements. Everything shifted slightly, stresses redistributed, the whole system recalibrating around something that hadn't been there before. 2 more production bugs. One took 4 hours, one took 90 minutes. The tickets had been sitting in the backlog for 11 and 19 days respectively. He didn't make a point of that. He just closed the tickets. They who hadn't spoken to him on Monday were asking technical questions by Wednesday. Not warmly, some of them. Cautiously, the way you tested ice by stepping on it lightly. But they were asking. Darnell was not among them. Darnell was something else. a sustained, low-frequency presence in Anthony's peripheral vision, never directly confrontational after Victor's redirect on Monday morning, but always adjacent, always slightly too close, like comments designed to land just inside the range of plausible deniability. A reference to Anthony's interesting background in a meeting that technically meant nothing. The consistent, architectural way he managed to position himself between Anthony and anyone who seemed genuinely interested in working with him. Anthony understood what was happening. He'd watched it happen to other people. It cleaned the floors of offices where people like Darnell operated, and he knew the structure of it, how it looked like nothing from the outside, how it compounded over time, how the person on the receiving end was always the one who appeared unreasonable if they named it out loud. He kept working. He was good at keeping working. 9 years of practice. Monday of the second week. Victor's office. 9 a.m. coffee getting cold. Victor had something in his expression that Anthony was starting to read, a quality of stillness that preceded difficult information. Certain skies looked before weather arrived. Titan Vertex project. Anthony waited. Inference pipeline rebuild. Legacy codebase. They've been a client for 4 years. Track renewal is contingent on a technical demonstration this Friday. What's the scope? Full rebuild. 6,000 lines of Python. Version 2.7. No comments, no documentation, multiple contributors from different eras. Kind of code that happens when 4 different teams inherited the same project over 5 years and none of them talked to each other. Anthony did the math. The math was not encouraging. That's 3 weeks minimum. If everything goes well, is Friday morning. 9 a.m., 4 days, Victor. I know. Silence. Darnell suggested you for this, and there it was, the shape of the thing. It clean and so obvious that Anthony almost wanted to admire the architecture of it. Almost. Darnell Shaw, who had spent 2 weeks making clear in every acceptable way that he believed Anthony Webb did not belong here, recommended Anthony for the project most likely to prove him right. He thinks I'll fail, Anthony said. He thinks you'll fail. Victor met his eyes. And I think he arranged the timeline specifically to make that more likely. Odds that carried weight. If you want to decline, I'll assign someone else. No record, no consequence. Anthony looked at the window. Atlanta, below doing its Tuesday thing. Traffic building on Peachtree. A hawk banking slow, lazy circles over the building across the street. He'd been watching this same bird for 2 weeks now, or one claiming territory by the patient fact of its presence. If I say no, he wins anyway. Yes, faced this way, I control the outcome. Victor studied him. The expression on his face was the one Anthony was starting to associate with the CTO's version of genuine emotion. Not theatrical, never theatrical, like just a slight deepening around the eyes. You're braver than I was at your age, or dumber. Those are not mutually exclusive. Victor slid the project folder across the desk. I'll get you everything I have on the codebase. And Anthony looked up. I'll bring lunch, Tuesday. 8 a.m. Anthony opened the codebase, 6,000 lines, which was not by itself a terrifying number. Mapped longer codebases in his head, the way cartographers mapped territories, not memorizing every street, but building the topology, understanding which areas connected to which, where the rivers ran, where the borders were. But this was not a clean territory. This was the cartographic equivalent of 5 different mapmakers, drawing the same city at different times, with different conventions and different ideas about where north was. Someone stapling all the maps together and calling it a single document, few named process 8 and run inference A2, and run inference A2 few E2. A function deep in the utility layer that someone had named it waxed on twatch, which turned out to be aspirational rather than descriptive, variables that existed in 3 different scopes simultaneously, for no reason that the code was willing to explain. He started at the top, built the mental map, layer by layer. I materialized at his desk at noon with a turkey sandwich and a water bottle, set them down without a word, and went back to his office. Anthony ate without tasting anything and kept reading. Darnell walked past at 2 p.m. paused, looked at Anthony's screen with the expression of someone wanting to appear casual and not quite managing it. How's it going, Webb? Good, really. Something in his tone that wasn't a question, because the last team that touched that code base documented it as, and I'm quoting, Architecturally challenging. That's a kind way to put it. Just checking in, he walked away whistling. Actually whistling. A specific whistle of someone who had set something in motion and was enjoying the anticipation of watching it arrive. Anthony watched him go. Thought, I cannot throw my laptop. Company property would reflect poorly. Turned back to the code. Progress by the end of Tuesday, 40% mapped. The territory beyond that was still dark. He understood the shape of the problem but not yet its solution. Wednesday, 6 a.m. arrival. The cleaning crew was still finishing the floors when Anthony got off the elevator, and one of the night staff, young guy, mid-20s, earbuds in, mop moving in the rhythm Anthony knew by muscle memory, looked up with the expression of someone whose territory had been unexpectedly entered. Anthony thought about saying something. Didn't. This wasn't the moment. He went to his desk. By noon, he'd mapped 70% and found what he'd suspected was there. The inference bottleneck wasn't where the documentation suggested, which was unsurprising, given the documentation was largely fiction, upstream in the pre-processing layer, where data was being transformed in a way that forced sequential processing on operations that should have been parallel. A 4-lane highway running through a single toll booth, and downstream moving at toll booth speed. Victor brought a sandwich again, turkey and Swiss again. Anthony appreciated the consistency. At 8 p.m. his phone rang. Daddy, Lily's voice. That specific pitch, that specific warmth, landing in his chest the way it always did, like a hand placed flat over something that had been cold. When are you coming home? Not yet, baby. I'm working on something important. Are you okay? You sound like you're thinking face. Damned face was apparently audible. He'd never known that. Not sad. Just tired. Mrs. Angela made sweet potato pie. A pause freighted with significance. I saved you a piece. The big corner piece. The crispy kind. His throat went tight. For the most mundane reason. A corner piece of pie, saved by a 6-year-old who understood, in the way children understood things directly and without theory, that the specific thing mattered. Not just pie. The corner piece. The crispy kind. Thanks, baby daddy. Mommy used to say one step at a time. He didn't answer immediately. Just let the words sit in the air between them. She did say that, so just do the next step. Don't do all the steps, just the next one. Just the next one. Yeah, satisfied the confidence of a coach who had delivered the necessary instruction. Love you more, Lily. She hung up. Anthony sat with his phone in his hand for 30 seconds. He put it in his pocket and went back to the code. Progress by midnight, 68%. Not enough, not close to enough. Fading Thursday. He hadn't really slept. 3 hours on the break room couch, a piece of furniture that appeared to have been designed by someone who considered comfort a weakness and back support an extravagance. He folded his jacket under his head and set an alarm for 4 a.m., and lay there doing math in his head until somewhere around 2:30 it became sleep by default rather than intention. He looked the part, accordingly, a stubble because he'd forgotten his razor at home. Eyes carrying the specific redness of someone who had been staring at a screen past every reasonable hour. His hands, when he got coffee from the machine, a small amount onto the counter that he cleaned up automatically. Old habit. Muscle memory from a different role in this same building. Darnell materialized at 10 a.m., energy of someone who had slept well and wanted you to know it without saying so. He stopped at Anthony's desk, looked at him, took in the stubble, the eyes, vagal condition of a man running on caffeine and determination, and one saved corner piece of sweet potato pie. Rough night? Fine. You look like you might want to reconsider, with the performance of genuine concern, the kind that was designed to be quoted back later as evidence of good faith. Offer still stands if you want to hand it off. No shame in it. Anthony looked up from the screen, met his eyes. Play them for exactly long enough. I'm good. Thank you. Darnell shrugged. Affable, walked away. And then because the universe had a flair for timing stopped and turned back. Demos at 9 tomorrow morning. Sharp, just making sure you hadn't lost track. Another pause, waited. Clients flying in from Houston tonight, he left. Anthony looked back at his screen, 75%. The core pipeline worked. It was real and documented and not a small thing. The data flow was clean, the model loading was solid, the basic inference chain ran correctly. The final optimization layer, The piece that turned functional into fast enough to be worth showing to a client who had flown in from Houston was refusing him. He'd tried 15 approaches since Tuesday, 15 algorithms, architectures. Each one failed in a slightly different way, which at least meant he was failing efficiently, eliminating possibilities, closing doors. But doors closing was not the same as a door opening. By 10 p.m. the floor was empty, like Anthony. The screen. The cursor blinking in a way that he was starting to find adversarial on a personal level. He stood up. Walked to the bathroom. Fluorescent lights, too white, the kind that showed you yourself without any of the mercy of warmer lighting. He looked in the mirror. He looked like a man who was running out of time and had run out of ideas and knew both things simultaneously. He whispered it to the reflection. Not for drama. Just because sometimes saying a thing out loud made the true shape of it visible. I can't do this. And saying it out loud made something else visible. That he'd been afraid of saying it for 2 days, but the fear of saying it had been taking up space that the solution needed. He picked up his phone. Called Victor. I'm not going to make it. His voice came out steadier than he felt. Something had settled in him by saying the thing out loud. I've been here 16 hours. The core pipeline is solid, but the optimization layer, I've tried 15 approaches. Nothing's working, and the demo is in 11 hours. Light voice came back without panic, without disappointment. Just, where are you? Office, what do you need? More time. He closed his eyes, which we don't have silence on the line. The specific quality of Victor Okafor not speaking, texture, not empty, just held. The client is flying in at 7 a.m. The contract is worth $120 million, a breath. We don't have more time. Then I failed. No, son, quiet. Son, carrying something Anthony didn't have language for. You tried. In 4 days, against an impossible timeline, against a setup designed to see you fall. That's not the same as failing. Anthony held the phone. Didn't answer. Get some rest if you can. The call ended. Anthony sat back down, put his head in his hands. He sat there in the specific silence of a floor where 100 people worked during daylight, and none of them were present now. The hum of the HVAC, the ghost sounds of a building settling into its own weight. The cursor still blinking, patient, merciless. He was so inside his own exhaustion that he didn't hear the elevator, didn't hear the footsteps on the tile. Deliberate and unhurried, of someone who had decided exactly how to cross a room and moved through it without revision. The lights on the far end of the floor clicked on. Motion sensors. The light moved toward him as she moved toward him, section by section, illuminating the path she was already taking. And then Jessica Cole was standing at the edge of his desk, 10:52 p.m., navy blazer over a white shirt, hair close-cropped and unadorned. Is carrying 2 paper cups of coffee from the break room machine. Not her usual white ceramic, just the machine cups, the kind everyone else used. Like she'd passed the break room on her way here and made a decision so small it barely counted as a decision. She set one of the cups on the edge of his desk. He looked up at her. I'm sorry. Words came from somewhere genuine. I couldn't finish it. Jessica pulled the chair from the adjacent empty desk and sat down beside him, not across from him. Not standing over him, beside him, at the same level. Whatever organizational chart existed between them had, at 10:52 on a Thursday night, been filed somewhere inaccessible. Show me what you have. What's the point? The demo is, show me. He pulled up the code, at the screen with a hand that wasn't quite steady. 75% done. Core pipeline is solid. Data flow, model loading, basic inference chain. But the final optimization layer, can't get the latency below 150 milliseconds at scale, and the Titan Vertex spec requires sub-20. I've tried restructuring the batching, tried async processing, tried compressing the model weights, tried 3 different quantization approaches. Jessica was looking at the screen, not at him. At the code, 2 minutes of silence. She turned the paper cup in her hands, round and round. Watched her read the code, the way he'd watched her read the whiteboard. Like she was looking through it at something underneath. You're solving the wrong problem. He looked at her, trying to optimize the entire pipeline to meet the latency spec. You don't need to, she pointed at the screen. Specifically at the pre-processing section, the part he'd identified as the bottleneck 2 days ago, and then, somehow, moving past in search of a more elegant solution. What's the actual computational bottleneck? Where is the time going? He looked at the section she was pointing at, ran the execution profile through his head, the pre-processing step, normalization and feature extraction. It's sequential. Running on CPU, so move it, he looked at her. GPU, leave the rest of the pipeline exactly as it is. Don't touch the model, don't touch the inference chain. Take the pre-processing step, the single thing making everything else wait, and move it to the GPU. Parallelize the normalization. 3 hours to rewrite. His mind was already building the architecture, already seeing how it would fit, already knowing, with the specific immediate certainty of a correct answer that you recognized rather than constructed, that she was right. That'll get us under 20 milliseconds? Significantly under. 8 or 9, he stared at the screen. Because she was right. Because the answer had been in the section he'd looked at 100 times. Because sometimes you were so inside a problem that you couldn't see its frame. All it took was someone arriving from outside, with 2 paper cups of coffee, and pointing at the thing that had been there the whole time. You're going to help me. It came out as a statement rather than a question. Wasn't sure which he'd meant it to be. Jessica met his eyes. Something passed between them in the look. Not personal. Not yet, but something adjacent to personal. Some that had to do with 2 people in an empty building at nearly midnight making the same choice simultaneously without negotiating it. We're going to finish this. 10:52 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. No CEO. No employee. No organizational structure of any kind that had relevance to the work in front of them. Jessica wrote CUDA kernels for the GPU preprocessing layer. She wrote them fast, and she wrote them clean, right, the code of someone who had come up through the technical side before the executive side, and still had the instincts in her hands, not just in her ability to evaluate the people who had them. Late Anthony refactored the data pipeline around the new structure, streamlining where it could be streamlined, making elegant what had accumulated as ugly over 5 years of and different intentions. They worked in parallel. In silence, a comfortable kind. The kind that wasn't avoiding conversation but simply didn't need it, because the thing that needed doing required all the bandwidth they had. At 1 a.m., Jessica stood up and stretched. Went to the break room, with 2 more paper cups they both drank. The building's HVAC hummed. Outside the windows, Atlanta was doing its late-night minimal self. Scattered headlights on Peachtree, the navigation lights on a plane banking south, red blink of a transmission tower in the distance that Anthony had watched from this window every night for 3 years from a different floor and a different angle. He put down his cup. "Why are you here?" Looked at him over the rim of hers. "Where else would I be? A CEO doesn't. I built this company, not defensively, factually. They know this codebase the way you know things you built yourself before you could afford to hire people to build them for you. I was here before anyone else." A pause. "I'm here because letting someone fail in a hole that was dug for them isn't something I'm willing to do." He absorbed that. "Darnell's going to say you're protecting me because Darnell says what Darnell says. A beat. I'm here because you've worked 16-hour days on an impossible timeline against a system that wanted to watch you fall. And because I know what that feels like." He looked at his cup. Oracle. Mentioned it briefly in passing during one of the early meetings. He'd filed it. "Tell me what actually happened." A pause. Not reluctant, more like she was deciding the level of architecture. 2013. 3 years out of Stanford. Both youngest senior VP they'd ever promoted, which I thought meant something about me and actually just meant they were running an experiment on whether the title would hold. She turned the cup in her hands. A SVP put me on a project 6 weeks before the client presentation. It was 18 months of work. I did everything. Stayed until 2-3 in the morning, skipped meals, called in every favor I had, ran on spite and caffeine for 6 weeks, and I failed. Not dramatically, just insufficient. The presentation was soft and everyone in the room knew it, and the SVP stood up and said he was going to reassign the project to a more experienced team. Her voice stayed flat, flatness of something that had been felt so many times it had been worn smooth. Fired me that afternoon. Said I wasn't built for the pace of it. Used other words too, about women in technical leadership. I won't repeat, and that he would deny having said, Anthony felt the anger move through him. Clean and immediate. "I'm sorry, I started Nexus AI 8 months later." The smallest shift in her expression. Not a smile exactly, that had the shape of satisfaction underneath it. "We're worth $2.8 billion. He retired 2 years ago." "I'm told he golfs badly," Anthony laughed. A genuine sound, pulled out by the specific image of a man who had tried to diminish Jessica Cole, now hooking drives into sand traps on a Tuesday afternoon. She looked at him. Something changed in her face, not dramatically, just a warmth that hadn't been there before, or that had been there and had decided it didn't need to stay managed. "I won't let Darnell do to you what was done to me. Not because of who you are to me," a careful pause, "as an employee of significant value, but because it's wrong, and I've been in the position of not stopping it when I should have." He looked at her. She looked at him. The 1 a.m. light in an empty office showed things as they were without flattery. And in that light, Jessica Cole looked like a person, not a CEO, not the voice in the doorway that had upended his life twice in 2 weeks. A person who had built something extraordinary from being told she couldn't, who was now sitting in a break room chair in the middle of the night because the alternative was going home. "Let's finish it," he said. They went back to work, 4:30 a.m. Hit run, the test suite loaded, progress bar on the left monitor, inference metrics on the right. A screen had the particular quality of something that was either going to confirm everything or reveal that they'd been building in the wrong direction and there was no longer time to fix it. Green. 1 test. Green. 5. Green across the board. Latency, 8.7 milliseconds. The spec was sub-20 accuracy, 98.9%. Up from the original system's 94.1, Anthony exhaled. A stiffic exhale of someone who had been holding a breath for 4 days and had only just remembered to release it. He leaned back in his chair. The chair creaked. It was the best sound he'd heard in a week. "We did it." He looked at her, looked at him, and then, because she said it first, because she insisted, "You did it." I pointed. That's exactly what happened. The moment between them had mass. It occupied the room. Neither of them moved, looked away. And then she did, looked at the window, at the Atlanta sky going from black to the specific charcoal that meant sunrise was 90 minutes out, go home. Sleep 2 hours. Shower. Back by 8:30. A pause. "I'll stay." 8. Prep the demo environment, Jessica. "That's an order, Mr. Webb," not unkindly. The order of someone who understood that sometimes the most useful thing you could do for another person was send them home. He packed his bag, walked to the elevator. At the door he turned back. She was already at his desk. Opening the architecture diagram, building the presentation slides at 4:30 in the morning in an empty building because she had decided to. He took the elevator down. Ice day, 9 a.m. The main conference room on the 13th floor had a better view and a longer table, and the specific atmospheric pressure of a room where significant money was about to either be secured or lost. Knight Whitfield sat at the center of one side, 55 years old, CEO of Titan Vertex Texas drawl, cowboy boots under a suit that cost 3 times as much as the boots. They'd flown in from Houston the previous evening and had the particular alertness of someone who had slept well in a hotel room and arrived ready to be impressed or to leave. Handshake when he met Anthony was the kind you felt in your whole arm. Not performative, just the handshake of someone who had spent a life in industries where you learned what a person was made of by how they held your hand. Beside him, Andra Park, Titan Vertex's CTO, 40, sharp-featured, the kind of careful attention in her eyes that came from years of being sold things that didn't perform as advertised. A notepad open and a pen in her hand, and the posture of someone who was here to be shown rather than told. On the Nexus side, Jessica, Victor, Darnell, and Anthony, showered and present in clothes that were clean if not new, letting on 2 hours of sleep and the specific alertness that came from having solved something. Darnell had seen Anthony walk in with Victor at 8:45, had stared, had done the math, had visibly calculated something and arrived at a result he didn't enjoy. "Shall we begin?" Jessica's voice moved through the room and the room oriented to it. "Anthony will present the new pipeline." Darnell's jaw moved, expected to deliver the news himself. The news being that Anthony had failed, that the project needed to be reassigned, that the experiment was over. The news being something else entirely was an outcome he hadn't prepared for. Anthony connected the laptop. His hands, were they shaking? Yes, a little, not enough for the room to see. Except Jessica noticed, 2 seats down, without looking up from the agenda in front of her. She said it quietly enough that only he heard. At this, he nodded. Began, good morning. I'm Anthony Webb. I rebuilt your inference pipeline over the past 4 days. The room processed that number. 4 days. Sandra Park's pen paused over her notepad. He walked them through it, with jargon. The architecture diagrams and plain language, and the kind of analogy he'd learned. Over 3 years of explaining complex systems to Lily at a kitchen table was more useful than technical precision to an audience that was listening to understand rather than to evaluate. Like neck problem, the pre-processing solution, the GPU parallelization, why it worked and why the previous approach hadn't. Then the live demo input, 10,000 records, the same dataset Titan Vertex had sent for validation. Progress bar metrics populating on the right monitor, inference latency, 8.7 milliseconds per record. Sandra Park wrote something on her notepad. Terry Whitfield put both elbows on the table and leaned forward. 98.9%. Whitfield stood up, chair scraping. Not dramatically, just a man who stood up because he was done sitting and wanted to be standing for what he was about to say. Son, did you just make our system 16 times faster? Yes, sir. In 4 days, I had help. He didn't look at Jessica when he said it. He didn't need to. Terry looked at the numbers again, then at Anthony, then at Jessica, then back at Anthony. The particular look of a man doing a calculation that had nothing to do with technology and everything to do with what he was going to tell people when he got back to Houston. It just saved us $3.5 million a year in compute costs. He extended his hand. The handshake this time was different from the one at the start of the meeting. That one had been courtesy. This one was recognition. I want this man on our next 3 projects. Whatever it costs. Jessica's smile was the composed, professional version. He's not available for transfer, but we can talk about consulting rates. Sandra Park closed her notepad. That's the most thorough technical presentation I've sat through in 2 years. She looked at Anthony directly. He told her the short version. MIT, junior year, 9 years. He said it plainly. Loaded. The specific nod of someone who was revising an assumption and found the revision interesting rather than troubling. After Titan Vertex left, handshakes, business cards, oomph of money about to be confirmed in writing. Jessica looked at Darnell, one look. No words required, my office now. Darnell sat in the chair across from Jessica's desk, with the posture of a man who had made a calculated gamble and was watching the odds resolve against him. He'd expected confrontation. He'd prepared arguments. Sitting on the desk in front of him was a different kind of conversation. Jessica stood on her side of the desk, arms at her sides. No folder, no props, no performance. Explain the reasoning behind the Titan Vertex assignment. I was evaluating his capabilities under real-world pressure. That's standard. You assigned a project with a 3-week minimum timeline and a 4-day deadline to someone in his 3rd week. On a contract worth $120 million, each sentence its own complete thought. No anger in her voice. Something more controlled than anger. That's not an evaluation, that's a setup. I'm going to stop you there. Darnell, because I've heard the word I 3 times and we haven't gotten to anything useful. Silence. She slid the document toward him. Performance improvement plan. 90 days. Specific behavioral requirements. Specific metrics. Toxic consequences if unmet. He looked at it, then up at her. Something moved across his face, surprise that had shame underneath it. He'd expected termination. He'd built his arguments around termination. It was a different kind of reckoning. 90 days, she said, to demonstrate that you can function as a constructive member of this team. Your technical skills aren't in question. Your judgment is. Willingness to let the work be more important than your ego is. A pause. I'm giving you the opportunity to show me those things can change. But I need you to understand clearly what happens if they don't. Looked at the document for a long moment. Then he signed it. He walked out. Not storming, not defeated in the obvious way. Just quieter than he'd walked in. Which was in some ways more significant. Jessica sat down at her desk alone. Put both hands flat on the surface and exhaled. Slow, long. The exhale of someone releasing something they'd been carrying at a controlled angle for too long. Should have done that weeks ago. 8:15 p.m. the same Friday, Anthony's phone rang, Angela James. Which meant school. Which meant Lily. His chest went cold in the specific way it went cold when Angela called at this hour. Mr. Webb, this is Sandra Simmons at Riverside Elementary. Lily is okay. She's not physically hurt. A pause, the medically trained sequence of least alarming information first. But there was an incident I need you to come in for. He was in Angela's car, borrowed without asking. I have to explain that later, in 4 minutes. Principal Simmons' office was the size of a large closet, furnished with the overflow from 3 different decades, certificates on the walls, a plant that needed water, the smell of old paper, and the particular weariness that settled into buildings where the work was important and the resources were never quite enough. Lily was in a chair that was a size too large for her, eyes red, cheeks dry now but recently not, a posture straight, the specific straightness of someone who had decided that crying was finished and dignity was the available option. Anthony crossed the room and crouched to her level. Tell me, they said I was lying. Her voice was steady, impressively steady for a 6-year-old. About you, about where you work. Principal Simmons filled in the rest. Lily had mentioned her father worked at Nexus AI. Some students had looked it up on their phones and found the articles about his maintenance position, which were not wrong, which were just no longer complete. They had told Lily she was making things up. A boy, a student named Tommy, had pushed her and called her poor trash. Anthony's hands closed at his sides. Where is this boy right now? Simmons explained that Tommy's parents were being contacted and would arrive within the hour. A turned back to Lily, crouched again, looked at her directly. Did you lie? No. Does your dad work at Nexus AI? Yes. Then you told the truth. Those kids found old information. He touched her chin lightly. Don't have to defend a true thing. A true thing is still true whether anyone believes it or not. Lily nodded. Once. The nod of someone filing this away. The door opened, and the room's atmosphere changed in the immediate, specific way rooms changed when Jessica Cole entered them. Not because she was loud or dramatic, but because she was certain. Absolutely certain, in a way that didn't announce itself but was immediately and entirely present. Simmons stood up. Miss Cole, I wasn't expecting. Jessica looked at Lily first. Are you okay? Lily looked at her. I'm better now, good. She looked at Simmons. The parents of the child who pushed her? Pushed is perhaps just a 6-year-old and called her a slur about her economic status. Which word are we using if not that one? Simmons sat back down. Tommy's parents arrived 15 minutes later. Both of them. Business casual. Offensive posture that Anthony recognized. The defensive posture of people who had been called to a school and had decided before arriving that their child was the victim of a misunderstanding. Tommy's father spoke first. Our son said the girl was telling other students her father had a different job than. Jessica's voice was even, completely even, like water that was very still and very deep. Anthony Webb is a senior technical consultant on my engineering team. He has been for 3 weeks. He is, at this point, one of the most valuable technical contributors I have. A pause. Your son owes Lily an apology. A genuine one, but the kind where he apologizes for how she felt about what he did. Tommy's father started to say something about the tone of this conversation. Jessica let him finish. Waited a full 2 seconds after he was done. Then quietly, I understand you have concerns about tone. I have concerns about a child being pushed and called trash. I'd like us to agree which concern is more urgent before we continue. Tommy's parents agreed. Tommy apologized. He looked at his shoes. Bailey received it, with the grave courtesy of someone who was going to decide later, privately, what it was worth. The parking lot afterward was warm, and smelled like cut grass from the field on the other side of the chain-link fence. Afternoon practice somewhere beyond it. The sound of kids and a coach's whistle filtering over in the particular way that made school parking lots feel, at this hour, like a kind of ordinary peace. Anthony caught up with Jessica at her car. They stopped when she heard him. You didn't have to come, he said. Not ungrateful. Just trying to understand. Yes, I did. Nobody called you. Sometimes you don't need to be called. She turned to look at him. Something in her expression that he hadn't seen before. Not in the conference room, not at the whiteboard, not at 1 a.m. with break room coffee. Something that didn't have a professional name. I had a little brother, Aaron. Was 8 years old. Anthony went still, construction site in Atlanta. Summer work. The company had been cutting corners on fall protection. Railings not rated for the load, anchor points that hadn't been inspected in 2 years. Went to work one morning. She stopped. Reset. He fell 3 stories. I'm sorry. He was curious about everything. He used to ask me why people looked through our father like he wasn't there, just because he worked with his hands. Looked at the chain link fence. At the kids on the field. Anthony understood she wasn't seeing them. I never had a good enough answer for him. What would you tell him now? She looked back at him. Directness of someone who had thought about this long enough to arrive somewhere. That people protect what they're afraid might replace them. They do it by making the thing they feel small. She paused. I spent a long time afraid of being made small. I built something large enough that it stopped working on me. Another pause. But Aaron didn't get to find out if that strategy worked. Every time I see someone being made small in a space I control, I think about what it would have cost someone to not look away, just once. Before it was too late, the coach's whistle again, distant. Anthony looked at her, looked at him. Atlanta going on around them, indifferent to the specific conversations happening in this parking lot between these 2 specific people. You're not going to lose this job, Anthony, she said it simply. Not as a promise, exactly, as a statement of something she intended to be true. He nodded. Couldn't speak for a moment. She got in her car, just in the parking lot, and watched her go and understood that what was happening between them had already moved to a point where he could accurately describe it as professional. He didn't know yet what that meant, wasn't sure yet what to do with the fact that he was starting to want to find out. He went to get Lily, and that evening, eating the sweet potato pie Angela had saved. The corner piece, the crispy kind, exactly as promised. With Lily across the small table, telling him about fractions in a way that suggested she found the concept personally offensive, he thought about the hawk he'd been watching from the 12th floor window, banking slow circles, plagued, claiming territory by the patient fact of its presence. He thought he was starting to understand what it was waiting for. 6 weeks after the Titan Vertex demo, someone took a photograph. Anthony never found out who. Didn't matter, ultimately. What mattered was that it existed. A photograph taken on a Friday evening in the parking structure on the north side of the Nexus AI building, grainy in the way phone photos went grainy in low light, showing 2 people walking toward the elevator bank with their arms not quite touching. Close enough that the question was obvious. Far enough that the answer wasn't. He found out about it the way everyone found out about things now. A notification. The specific lurch of seeing your own name in a context you hadn't put it in. TechCrunch. 7:14 a.m. on a Monday, Nexus AI CEO Jessica Cole reportedly dating janitor she promoted. Nepotism love story. Or both. He read it twice, and he called Jessica. She picked up on the first ring, which was unusual. She'd explained once that she operated on the theory that first ring pickups communicated eagerness and third ring communicated unavailability, but the second ring was the precise center of professional confidence. First ring meant she'd already seen it. I saw it. What do we do? I have a board meeting in 2 hours. A pause. Controlled. 80 of her voice when she was managing something larger than it appeared. Don't say anything to anyone at the office. Not yet. 2 hours, Jessica. Trust me. He trusted her. He went to work. He sat at his desk and opened his laptop and stared at code that he could not read because his brain was doing something that was not reading. Around him, the floor had the charged, actional energy of a space where everyone had seen the same thing and was performing the act of not having seen it. Darnell Shaw said nothing, which was somehow worse than if he'd said something. Right at his desk with his coffee and his 90-day PIP, and his face arranged into the particular blankness of a man waiting to see how a situation resolved before deciding what he thought about it. 8 weeks into the PIP, quieter than he'd been, blazoned. Still watching, Victor appeared at Anthony's desk at 10:30, sat in the adjacent chair, said nothing for a moment, just sat, which from Victor Okafor communicated more than most people communicated in paragraphs. You okay? Working on it. Harold Patterson is not a bad man. Victor folded his hands. He's a careful man. And careful men in his position look at optics first and people second. It's not malice, but particular blindness that comes with that much accountability to that many shareholders. Anthony looked at his screen. What are they asking her to do? Victor was quiet for a moment. Choose, one word, the weight of everything it contained. Anthony turned that over. 9 years of choosing. Choosing to come home instead of staying enrolled. Choosing the overnight shift because it paid more. Choosing to put the money in Lily's savings account instead of buying a bed frame. 9 years of choices made from the position of someone who understood that choices had costs, and the costs were always real, and someone always paid them. Not about what it would cost Jessica to make this choice. Either direction. She shouldn't have to, he said. No. Victor unfolded his hands. She shouldn't. Jessica walked out of the board meeting at 11:47 a.m. Anthony knew because he was near the elevator when she came out. He'd gone to get coffee from the break room on the 15th floor, specifically because it had the better machine and had nothing whatsoever to do with which floor the board met on. Wasn't waiting for her. Or he was. He'd stopped pretending the line between those two things was clear. She saw him. Didn't change her pace or her expression in any way that would read as significant from a distance. Right, but she stopped walking when she reached him, and the two of them stood in the corridor outside the elevator bank, with the Atlanta skyline going about its indifferent business through the floor-to-ceiling windows behind her. Harold wants you gone or wants a statement ending the relationship, flat, direct. The Jessica Cole version of I'm not going to make you ask. He's calling it fiduciary duty. Shareholder confidence, optics, then I'll resign. Bates did something. No, Jessica, you built this company. You built it from nothing after someone told you that you couldn't, and I am not going to be the reason. Stop, not harsh. Just stop. I've been here before. Oracle. Circumstances, same architecture. Someone in a position of power telling me to make myself smaller, so everyone else stayed comfortable. She held his eyes. I stepped back. I gave up the thing. I told myself it was the pragmatic choice and the only choice, and I have spent 8 years building something from the ground of that moment, and I will not. She stopped. Reset. Quieta, I won't make that same trade again. He looked at her. 8. The stock dropped 3%. I know. Harold's going to do what Harold does, and I'm going to do what I do. She straightened, the specific straightening of someone who had made a decision before walking into this conversation and was now confirming it out loud. We go public. Full transparency. We own the story before TechCrunch owns it any further. That's a significant risk. I'm aware of the risk. If it backfires, then it backfires. And I'll know I didn't hide something I had no reason to hide. A beat. I am 41 years old, Anthony, and I am tired of the performance. Managed distance. The careful public presentation of a person who doesn't feel anything inconvenient. I am tired of it. He looked at her for a long moment, and the corridor was empty. The building going on around them, indifferent and busy. Sure, I've never been more certain of anything that also terrified me. That was honest enough. He nodded. Then let's do it. A press conference was held at the Georgia World Congress Center on a Tuesday afternoon. 200 Nexus AI employees. 31 journalists. A live stream that, by the time Jessica stepped to the podium, they had 17,000 concurrent viewers and was climbing by the minute. Anthony stood to her left. Visible. That was the point. To be visible, to not arrange himself into the background, let the fact of his presence say the thing that presence said, without requiring explanation. He was wearing the white shirt again, the one he'd ironed at Angela's house the night before, because he'd finally bought his own iron, and then immediately left it at her apartment, which was apparently his default relationship with irons. A coffee stain on the left cuff was still there. He'd stopped trying to remove it 3 weeks ago. It was his now. It had claims. Jessica stepped to the podium. Yesterday morning, TechCrunch published a photograph and a question. To answer the question directly, because I believe in direct answers, and because I believe the people in this room and watching this stream deserve them. A pause. The room did its intake of breath. Yes. Webb and I are in a relationship. It began after his promotions, not before. I want to be specific about that, because specificity is what the situation requires. She looked out at the room, not at Anthony, at the room. Like Mr. Webb's first promotion from maintenance staff to technical consultant was based on a correction he made to a neural network training algorithm that 17 credentialed engineers had been unable to resolve. Correction reduced our error rate by 67%. It is documented. It is reproducible. It required no relationship to produce and no relationship to verify. A journalist raised a hand. Jessica continued. Subsequent advancement to senior technical architect was based on the Titan Vertex project, a rebuild of a 6,000-line legacy codebase completed in 4 days against an estimated 3-week timeline, attained a $120 million client contract, and produced a system 16 times faster than what it replaced. Also documented. Also verifiable by parties with no personal investment in the outcome. Another pause. I ought promote Anthony Webb because of personal feelings. I developed personal feelings because Anthony Webb is the kind of person who inspires them. In that order. I want that sequence on record. Silence. Like a sound from the room that was hard to categorize. Not applause yet, not dissent, but the sound of 200 people recalibrating simultaneously. A journalist found his voice. Does a personal relationship compromise your judgment as CEO? Jessica's answer arrived fully formed because it had been forming for a long time. Having feelings doesn't compromise my judgment. It makes me human. And if being human disqualifies someone from leadership, then we need to examine very carefully what we've been asking our leaders to be. Another hand. What if the board insists? The board governs business strategy. This isn't business strategy, Anthony stepped forward. Not because he'd planned to, because the room was being filled with Jessica's words and her courage, and he had something that was his to say. Something she couldn't say on his behalf. He didn't have a prepared statement. He had the thing he always had, as the unfiltered version of what was actually true. I didn't ask for any of this. His voice in the microphone surprised him, steadier than he felt. The attention, the controversy, the photograph. I was trying to do good work. I'm still trying to do good work. He looked at the cameras, at the people, at the 200 faces that were Nexus AI and the 17,000 watching from places he'd never see. I spent 9 years being invisible, practically invisible, just the ordinary daily invisibility of someone who cleans the floors in buildings where other people make decisions, and then someone looked at me, not at the uniform, not at the job title, at me, a beat, a voice held. If people think that's inappropriate, I feel genuinely sorry for them, because they've never known what it means to be seen as a person rather than a function. I wouldn't trade that. Not for any version of this that was easier or cleaner or less complicated. Half the room clapped, half stayed quiet. Both responses were honest and both were valid. A monitor in the green room that someone had set up to track the live data. The stock ticker updated during the conference. Up 2%. The public, it turned out, had an appetite for the real thing. Harold Patterson called Jessica's cell at 4:30 that afternoon. She let it ring. Then called him back from her car in the parking structure. The same structure where the photograph had been taken, later acknowledged to Anthony, was either irony or poetry, and she was comfortable calling it both. The stock's up, she said, before Harold could establish his opening position. Live stream hit 40,000 views before we closed. 3 of our institutional investors have already communicated that they consider the matter resolved. A pause. I understand your concerns, Harold. I'd like to continue this conversation in our regular cadence rather than in emergency posture. I think we're past the emergency. Harold Patterson was quiet for a moment. The recalibrating kind of quiet. You could have handled this differently. Light it honestly. In my experience, those aren't always the same thing, but in this case they were. Another pause. I'll see you at the quarterly review. She ended the call, sat in her car, exhaled. Long, slow, real exhale of someone who had been managing their breathing carefully for 24 hours and was only just now allowed to stop. Then she drove to Vine City. Dinner at Anthony's apartment that night was pasta. Because it was always pasta. Because pasta was what the refrigerator had and what the budget allowed, and because Lily had strong opinions about pasta, with the red sauce from the jar on the second shelf. Strong opinions from a 6-year-old about dinner constitute something close to democratic governance in the Webb household. Jessica arrived at 7. Jeans. The first time Anthony had seen her in jeans, they shouldn't have changed anything and did anyway, because the jeans were just jeans and she was just a person in them, and both of those facts were somehow new information. She'd brought wine. Good wine, the kind with a label that communicated something Anthony didn't have the vocabulary for and didn't need, because the gesture was what it was. Lily answered the door. She'd been stationed there for 4 minutes in anticipation. "You came back," Lily informed her, with the air of someone confirming a hypothesis they'd been running. "I came back," Jessica agreed. "We're having pasta. I like pasta." Lily evaluated her. The full 6-year-old evaluation. It was more thorough than it appeared. "Okay," she decided, and stepped back to let her in. They ate at the small table. 3 people, knees nearly touching, at the corner of Jessica's chair, catching on the shimmed leg and tipping it slightly before Lily reached over and pressed it back level with the matter-of-fact competence of someone who had been compensating for that leg her entire conscious life. Lily ate 3 bites and then looked at Jessica with the focused attention of someone who had been holding a question and had decided this was the moment. "Do you have kids?" "No, do you want kids?" Anthony opened his mouth. "Lily, that's okay." Jessica looked at Lily directly. "I used to think I didn't have time. Now I'm not sure that was ever really about time." Lily considered this with genuine seriousness. "You could borrow me on weekends. I'm a good kid mostly, except when I'm not. But that's not every weekend." Jessica laughed. The unguarded kind, the kind that changed her face completely, not into something unrecognizable but into something more fully itself. Lights of her real and both of them her. Anthony ate his pasta and thought, here it is, this is the thing, this kitchen, this table, this lamp that was slightly too dim, this 6-year-old negotiating weekend borrowing arrangements with the CEO of a $2.8 billion company. This is the thing he'd been waiting for without knowing what shape it would arrive in. After dinner, Lily announced that it was Lego time, which was non-negotiable, and pulled Jessica by the hand to the living room floor. Anthony washed the dishes. 3 plates, 3 forks, 3 cups, the same count as always, except tonight like a different number from the kitchen. He could hear them. Lily's voice, instructional, explaining the structural requirements of the castle they were building. Jessica's voice, lower, asking questions and being corrected without embarrassment. "The tower keeps falling. I know. I think the base needs." "No. It needs more of the flat ones. The flat ones make it stable. The tall ones make it look good, but the flat ones make it not fall. You have to do the flat ones first even though they're boring." A pause. Then Jessica, quietly, "That's actually very good structural advice, I know," Lily said, with the confidence of someone who had engineered many towers and knew exactly what she was talking about. Anthony put the last dish in the drying rack and leaned against the counter and looked at the 2 of them on the floor and let himself feel the full weight of what he was looking at. 9 years of flat pieces. 9 years of building the base. Invisible, non-collapsible foundation work. And now the flat pieces were done and the tower was going up, and he didn't know yet how tall it would get. Understood, for the first time in a long time, that the base was solid enough to find out. Weeks after the press conference, Victor called on a Thursday afternoon, with the tone he used when he was about to ask something he expected to meet resistance. The annual summit. "Next month, Georgia World Congress Center. I want you to present the AI Ethics Initiative." Anthony was reviewing a new code base, and his brain needed a full second to exit one context before entering another. "You want me to present 1,200 attendees. The initiative needs a face, and Anthony." Victor paused, in the way he paused when he wanted his next sentence to land without decoration. "You are the most credible person in this company to talk about what AI ethics actually means at the human level, not the policy level. Those are different things, and you know the difference in a way that most people in that room won't, Victor. I almost got sick backstage at the press conference, and then you didn't. And then you were very good. It was 200 people. This is 1,200. 1,200 people who came specifically to hear someone say something true, which you are, in my experience, constitutionally incapable of not doing, Anthony closed his laptop, sat back. I need an answer. Monday, he called Jessica from his car. She picked up on the second ring, the precise center of professional confidence, as always. Victor asked me to present at the summit. I know. I suggested you. Of course she had. You could have mentioned it before he called. It's more useful now. What are you going to say? I don't know yet. Then figure that out first. The rest is logistics. He figured it out over 2 weeks. At his desk, in the commute, at the kitchen table, while Lily did homework beside him, and Jessica helped with the fractions that required a patience Anthony's engineer brain didn't naturally produce. He figured out what he actually wanted to say turned out to be different from what he'd initially assumed he would say. He wrote a version of the presentation and showed it to Jessica. She read it once, closed the laptop. More of the first 10 minutes. Less of the last 5, he revised. Touch it to Lily, who was his most honest audience because she had no investment in his professional success and strong investments in not being bored. She pointed at a dense slide and said it needed a picture instead of words. She was right. Practiced in the living room 3 times. Victor watched the third run-through and sat in silence for a moment after and then said, "Don't change anything," which from Victor Okafor was the equivalent of a standing ovation. Anthony was beginning to understand that. The night before the summit, 2:13 a.m., Anthony was in the living room because his body had decided that sleep was not currently available. He sat on the couch, the Craigslist sectional, still. It had acquired a second piece and 2 new cushions that Lily had picked out at Target in a shade of purple she described as very serious, and that Anthony loved unreasonably, and catalogued his fears with the methodical thoroughness of someone taking inventory. On stage, lose the thread. Say something that lands wrong. The presentation software crashes. He trips on the single step up to the podium, which should not be a tripping hazard, and yet, someone asks a question he can't answer. 1,200 people simultaneously decide they've made a category error about who he is. He embarrasses Jessica. He embarrasses Lily. He confirms, finally and in front of witnesses, that the conference room correction was the anomaly everyone suspected. One lucky read on one tired night, the exception rather than the evidence, Jessica came out of the bedroom. She'd been staying here most nights now. Not formally, liked by announcement. Just gradually, the way things that are true become true. By happening repeatedly until they were simply the arrangement. Buck stood in the doorway in his old grey t-shirt with her hair unstyled and her feet bare on the floor, and she looked at him on the couch and sat down beside him without asking. "Tell me all of them," she said. "A single thing that might go wrong," he told her. All of it. The complete inventory. She sat with her knees pulled up to her chest and listened without interrupting, which was not her natural mode, and he appreciated the specific effort of it. I finished, she said. "Now, tell me one thing that might go right," he thought. Actually thought. Set aside the instinct to deflect toward modesty, and just asked himself what was actually true. I might help someone. Someone in that room who thinks they don't belong there. Someone who cleaned something or built something or drove something for years, while their brain was working on problems nobody asked them to solve. I'd make that person feel like the room is also theirs. She looked at him. Then that's who you're talking to. Forget the 1,200. Find that one person. Talk to them. He looked at her. The 2 a.m. light, same lamp he'd bought at Target when he moved in and never replaced because it had become his. The purple cushions, all of it. "I love you," he said. Out loud. First time completely. She went still, not away from him, just still. A specific stillness of someone who had received information they'd been waiting for and needed a moment to confirm it was real. "Say that again," she said. "I love you." No hesitation. The whole thing. "The cufflinks you haven't given me yet, I know about because you are not as subtle as you think you are." A sound from her that was almost a laugh. "And the way you talk to Lily like she's a full person with valid opinions. And the 2 a.m. coffee in paper cups, you said we're going to finish this like it was the only option available. All of it. I love all of it." She put her hands on his face. Both of them. "The way you held something you'd been afraid of losing. I love you," she said. "I have for longer than is professionally advisable." He laughed. She laughed. The apartment quiet around them. Lily asleep in the bedroom. Atlanta outside the window doing its nighttime version of itself. Two of them on a second-hand couch under a too-dim lamp, which was not a setting for a love story and was exactly the setting for this one. Summit morning. Georgia World Congress Center, the large hall, 1,200 seats, and most of them filling. Anthony was backstage at 8:15 in a suit that Jessica had insisted on and paid for, and that fit him the way things fit when someone who understood fit had chosen them. His shoes were new, soles intact. He'd bought them himself, which had felt significant in a way he didn't fully have language for. He was objectively, deeply afraid. Victor found him backstage, clapped him once on the shoulder, front row, lay there the whole time, and then went to his seat, because Victor Okafor did not linger around anxiety he couldn't resolve. Then Lily appeared. He hadn't known she was coming. That was the point. Jessica had arranged it as a surprise. They called Angela and the school, coordinated it with the logistical precision she applied to everything she considered worth precision. Lily came in from the side entrance with Angela James behind her, wearing the pink dress with the yellow daisies. The new version, identical in style to the old one, because some things deserved to continue, and holding a piece of construction paper she'd folded into a sign. He could read it from 10 feet away. Handwriting, a drawing of a person in a suit that bore only a general resemblance to any actual human being. The words, "You're my hero, Dad." He crouched down. She came to him. "You're here." Jessica said, "I had to see you be brave." "I'm not brave. I am terrified." Lily pulled back and looked at him with the expression she made when she was about to say something she considered obvious. "Mommy used to say brave isn't not being scared. Brave is being scared and doing it anyway." A pause. "So be scared. But do it anyway." He held her for a moment. The particular smell of her, the store-brand shampoo, something underneath it that was just hers, just Lily, the scent of 9 years of choosing right, even when choosing right was hard. Then he straightened up, walked to the stage, 1,200 people. The lights were warm and too bright and pointed in a way that made the front rows visible and the back rows a collective shape. He found Lily in the third row. She waved the sign, like Jessica 2 seats from her. Not at the side in the CEO position in the audience, there with the people. He began, "Good morning, my name is Anthony Webb." He paused. "Let it be simple. Most of you know the short version of my story. Maintenance staff, whiteboard, fast promotion." The headline. "I'm not here to tell you that version, because you already have it and it's less interesting than what's underneath it." The room was quiet, because my daughter asked me a question last week. She asked, if computers are so smart, why do they sometimes hurt people? He let it sit. I didn't have a clean answer, because the honest answer is complicated. AI doesn't hurt people. Systems built by people who aren't thinking carefully about people, those hurt people. The algorithm is just the mechanism. We are the decision. He clicked to the first slide, not bullets. A photograph, resume screening algorithm used by hundreds of companies. He explained what it did, what it learned, who it excluded systematically because of who had historically been included, because no one had stopped to ask whether the historical data was a record worth learning from. The second slide. A facial recognition system, accuracy numbers that diverged along the axis of skin tone in a way that was not ambiguous, that had been documented for years, and that was still present in deployed systems being used in consequential decisions. The third slide. A predictive policing algorithm that, when traced back to its training data, a closed loop, a system that reinforced the conditions that produced it, endlessly, at machine speed, calling it prediction when what it was actually doing was repetition. "I'm not here to assign blame," he said. "I'm here to ask a question, like if we built these systems the way we wish the world actually worked. Not the world as it was when the data was collected. The world as it could be." He paused. "The data is a record of the past. It's not an argument for the future." He looked up from the podium. 6 months ago, someone looked at a whiteboard I'd written on at midnight and asked who I was. Not where I'd been, not what I did. Who I was. His voice was steady. I was surprised by how steady it was. And the decision she made based on the answer to that question changed my life. Because she was operating outside the algorithm. She was asking a question that a hiring system, a credential filter, background check, none of them would have asked. They would have looked at 9 years of maintenance work and made a calculation. And the calculation would have been wrong. He let that land. The algorithm would have missed me. Algorithm misses people like me every day, in every industry, in every city. People who are more than their record. People whose potential is being decided right now by systems that learned from data that was never designed to see them. Was very still. I don't have a 12-point framework for you. What I can tell you is this. The most important technical decision I've made in the last 6 months wasn't an algorithm. It was asking for help. I looked at Jessica in the audience. She didn't look away. I was failing at 2 in the morning on a project that mattered, and I called my CTO and said I can't do this, and he told me I was trying. Like 20 minutes later, someone came to the office and sat down next to me and said, "Show me what you have, a beat." That's the AI ethics intervention I know how to talk about, not the policy document, the moment. Someone showing up and saying, "Wait, you have as if what you have is worth seeing." He stepped back from the podium. The room was quiet for 3 seconds. Then it wasn't. Not explosive applause. Not the grateful, relieved kind. The kind that built, like standing as they chose to stand, one by one, not in a wave. The individual decision, made separately, by each person who decided that what they'd just heard required them to be on their feet. It moved through the room like something organic, like something that couldn't be coordinated. Anthony stood at the podium, and his vision went imprecise, and he found Lily in the 3rd row with her sign, and he found Jessica, and he found Victor in the front row, standing, his face carrying the expression it had when he felt something he didn't have infrastructure for. He found himself. The main room backstage was quiet by comparison to the hall. 3 companies approached him in the first 20 minutes after he came off stage. VP offers. CTO offers. One venture capitalist who wanted to fund something, anything. Anthony had an idea anywhere. He thanked all of them, declined all of them. He had a job. They had work that mattered, and a team he was learning to trust, and a problem. The real problem of building systems that saw people rather than processing them. That was going to take longer than he could currently see the end of. Was not interested in trading the work for the performance of having done the work. That distinction had become important to him somewhere in the last 6 months, and he intended to keep it. Jessica found him after the room had thinned, in a small box, navy blue velvet. He recognized the format of something significant and opened his mouth. "Before you say anything," he started. "It's not what you think." Something in her expression that wasn't quite a smile but had the shape of one underneath it. "Though I'm noting that you thought something." He took the box, opened it. Inside, 2 cufflinks, silver, small, lifted one and turned it toward the light to read the engraving on the flat back, "Seen, valued." Enough. He looked up at her. "I had them made after the press conference." She held his eyes. "I've been waiting for the right moment. This is it. This is it. Because today was the first day I watched you speak without looking at me to check if it was working. Today you were talking to them because you had something to say, not to prove something to the room, not to earn something from it. Just to say it." A pause. "You don't need anyone to confirm who you are anymore, you know, which means the inscription is finally true in the way I meant it when I had it made." He held the cufflinks in his palm. "Seen, valued. Enough. 9 years of being none of those things. And then a whiteboard and a midnight marker and a woman who asked who he was instead of where he'd been. I'll wear them every day," he said. She kissed him. In the green room, middle of a workday. He kissed her back without any version of restraint, because the green room was not a conference room. And this was not a negotiation, and there was no version of this moment that benefited from being managed. Status. A Friday night, the TV showed a loading screen. Anthony on the couch. Lily beside him, Mr. Hoppy in her lap. Ovid, one ear limpid and showing the specific wear of something that has been carried everywhere, by someone who carries things they love everywhere. Jessica on his other side. Feet tucked under her, hair unstyled, relaxation of someone who had made it to Friday and intended to stay there. "Close your eyes," Anthony said. Lily closed her eyes immediately. Jessica raised an eyebrow. "You too." She closed them. I could tell she was suspicious from the specific quality of her closed eye expression, which was not the same as her regular eye expression. In a way that he'd learned to read, he picked up the remote. Pulled up the game on the TV. Okay. Open, screen loaded, bright colors. Blocky art. 3 characters standing on a hill against a cartoon Atlanta behind them, the title in the font that only video game title screens used. Anthony, Lily, and Jessica's adventure. Baker's hand went to her mouth. Lily launched off the couch. Daddy, you made a new level. I made more than a new level. He'd been working on it for 6 weeks. Nights after they were both asleep. Game he'd originally built for Lily 2 years ago. Clumsy, charming, built on code he'd written in spare hours on the old laptop to give her something that was just theirs. Rebuilt, expanded, with 3 characters now instead of 1. Character select screen, a figure with a wrench and a tool belt. A small figure with a map and a backpack. A figure with a laptop and a blueprint. That's me, Lily said, pointing at the one with the map. That's you, the wrench. That's me, that's. She pointed at the third one. Looked at Jessica, looked back at the screen. That's you. Jessica was not moving. Looking at the screen with the expression of someone, receiving something they hadn't known they were waiting for. Something they hadn't even known to want until it arrived. They played the game. All 3 of them. Controllers in hand, they arguing cheerfully about puzzle solutions. Lily providing directional guidance with the authority of someone who lived here and knew where everything was. The final level was a large house on a hill. A game it was labeled home in block letters above the front door, and in the game Anthony's character knelt down in the front yard. Text appeared on screen. Simple. White letters on a dark background. Jessica. We'll build this place forever. She turned her head slowly to look at him. He was not on the couch anymore. He was kneeling beside it, on the actual floor, holding a ring box, small, unhurried, a gold band with a single diamond that was neither flashy nor apologetic, just honest, the way he'd tried to be for as long as he'd known her. Anthony. I know the timing isn't, Anthony, conventional, and I know we are technically still. Anthony. Her voice was doing several things simultaneously. Stop talking and finish asking. He stopped talking. Looked at her. Will you? Lily had abandoned her controller. She was on her knees on the couch cushion behind him, both hands gripping his shoulders, vibrating with an energy too large for her body. Say yes, say yes, say yes, Jessica laughed. It sounded like crying. Both at once. Yes, she said. 1,000 times yes. He put the ring on her finger. She pulled him up off the floor and into her arms, and Lily launched herself into both of them, simultaneously, and Mr. Hoppy went sideways off the cushion and hit the floor, and nobody picked him up for approximately 4 minutes, because all 3 of them were holding on to each other in the way you held on to things you'd been afraid of not having. Lake was small, 60 people, rooftop in downtown Atlanta on a September evening, when the heat had finally relented and the sky was doing the specific Atlanta September thing, where it turned colors that seemed like too many for a single sunset. Orange bleeding into rose bleeding into a purple that had no business being that particular shade and was anyway. Victor stood as best man and managed to communicate everything he felt without once becoming theatrical about it, which was completely Victor, which was exactly right. Angela James was in the front row and had been crying since she arrived, announced preemptively when she got there so that no one would worry about her. Terry Whitfield had flown in from Houston. Nobody had asked him to. He'd simply arrived because Terry Whitfield was the kind of man who showed up to things that mattered whether or not he was technically on the guest list. Darnell Shaw had completed his 90-day PIP in month 3 and quietly resigned the following week. Sent Anthony a 2-line email, professional, measured, no warmth but no hostility either, that said something in its brevity about what the PIP had cost him, and what leaving had cost him, and that Anthony chose to respect without examining too closely. I had gone to a woman from the infrastructure team who'd been doing VP-level work for 2 years without the title. Victor had made that call himself. Lily was the flower girl. Pink dress, yellow daisies, one version of the same dress that had accompanied every significant occasion for the last 3 years. Because some things deserved to continue regardless of whether they'd worn out. Anthony's vows were not long. Written and rewritten them 6 times and thrown out everything that sounded like a speech and kept only what was just true. Jessica, 8 months ago you looked at a whiteboard I'd drawn on at midnight and asked who I was. Not what I did, but where I'd been. Who I was, he met her eyes. The rooftop and the skyline behind her and the 60 people and all of it felt, somehow, like exactly the right-sized container for this specific thing. It taught me that the foundation matters more than the tower, that the flat pieces come first even though they're boring, that the scariest thing isn't failing, it's deciding not to try. His voice was steady. He was no longer surprised by this. I choose you. Every flat piece, every scared step, every ordinary Tuesday morning, all of it. Her vows were longer. She'd always had more to say than he did, and he had always loved that about her, Anthony. You reminded me what I built this for. At the valuation or the board or the quarterly earnings, her voice held. Just the real work, which is not the code or the pipeline or the contract. The real work is seeing people accurately and then treating them accordingly. A breath. You showed me I'd stopped doing that. And then you showed me what it looked like to start again. By being exactly who you were, in exactly the circumstances you were in, without apology and without performance. She looked at him. Trust you. I choose Lily. I choose whatever comes next in whatever shape it arrives. Lily, in the front row, made a sound that was indistinguishable from pure joy. They kissed, long and sweet. 60 people made the sounds. 60 people made at a thing like this. And then Lily, because Lily walked up to Victor and asked him very seriously if she could borrow the microphone. Victor, as constitutionally incapable of saying no to a reasonable request from a child, handed it over. The feedback squeal cleared. I have something to say. Held the microphone with the two-handed grip of someone who had watched enough people do this to know the technique, but not enough to know the protocol. I used to think families were like Legos in a box. All the pieces already decided. Just put them together the way the picture shows. She looked at Anthony, then at Jessica. But Daddy showed me you have to build them, one piece at a time, from whatever you have. Don't always know what it's going to look like when you're done. A pause, the specific pause of a 7-year-old who had rehearsed this and wanted to make sure she got to the important part. And Jessica is our best piece, Topt said, something that wasn't words. Victor retrieved the microphone with the quiet efficiency of a man who understood that some moments needed to be allowed to close on their own. The music started. And 3 months after the wedding, on a Wednesday morning in December, Anthony stepped off the elevator on the 12th floor at 7:50. Earlier than most people. The cleaning crew was finishing. One of the night staff, a young man, like 20s, earbuds in, mop moving in the particular rhythm Anthony knew without having to think about it, saw the badge. VP, Engineering. Looked back down. Anthony stopped. Hey, the young man took out one earbud. Very. The wariness of someone who had learned to be careful about questions from people with VP badges at 7:50 in the morning. How long have you been on this shift? 7 months. Anthony nodded. 7 months meant the young man knew which floors ran hot in summer, and which hallways smelled like old coffee at 4 in the morning, and which trash cans held the real evidence of how a project was going. 7 months meant he understood something about a building from the inside out in a way that nobody who arrived at 9 and left at 6 would ever understand. What does your brain do while you're working? The young man looked at him. Do you mean your hands are doing this? What does your brain work on? A pause, longer than expected. The young man looked at his mop, at the floor, at Anthony. Something shifted in his expression. The careful neutral of someone who had learned to keep things in giving way to something more specific and more reluctant and more real. Code, he said, quietly. Like admitting something. I'm teaching myself. Right after the shift. Python. I've been working through this ML textbook, but the 3rd chapter, the math keeps, the chain rule application. The young man blinked. Yeah, exactly that. Anthony reached into his jacket pocket. Business card. He'd had them for 8 months and still felt slightly absurd giving them out, which he'd told Jessica, who had told him without any particular gentleness to get over it. He held the card out. The young man took it. Read it. Write again. Email me, Anthony said. I'll walk you through chapter 3. And when you're ready, if you want, we can talk about what else might be possible. The young man looked at the card, then up at Anthony. You serious? Completely. Anthony took the elevator down. He stood on the street for a moment. Atlanta going about its morning, indifferent to the specific thing that had just happened in the lobby of a building on Peachtree Street. He thought about Harold, a plant manager in Birmingham, who had paid a semester's tuition out of his own pocket and told Victor he wasn't doing a favor. He was just refusing to let something go to waste. He thought about the arithmetic of these moments, how they compounded forward in ways that neither person could track, how one decision to see someone clearly could move through time and show up decades later in the life of someone who would never know the original source. About a whiteboard, a red marker. 11:47 at night, he thought about a hawk banking slow circles over Midtown, patient and deliberate, claiming territory by the simple, sustained fact of its presence. That evening, September light through the window of the apartment that was bigger than the one in Vine City and smaller than it needed to be, which made it exactly right. Anthony and Jessica on the couch. Lily at the kitchen table doing homework, writing a math problem out loud to no one in particular, in the way she'd done since she was 4, and which neither of them had ever asked her to stop. On the couch beside Jessica, asleep in the swing carrier, was Aaron Webb, 6 months old, aimed for a boy who had fallen from a scaffold in Atlanta 18 years ago, and who had deserved more years than he got, and who was going to get them now in a different way. In his name going forward through the world, the fact of this family existing, in all the things that came next, Anthony's arm around Jessica, her head on his shoulder. Not heavy, just present, solid, the weight of something real. He looked at his family, Lily arguing with a fraction under her breath, Aaron asleep with total commitment, face mashed against the carrier fabric, executing sleep the way he executed everything, fully and without reservation. Jessica's hand on Anthony's chest, rising and falling with his breathing, because that was where her hand went now in the evenings when they were home, and had gone for long enough that it no longer required a decision. He thought about the thing he'd said in the green room, the thing he'd said to the 1,200 people and to the cameras, and to the one person he'd been actually talking to, who was probably somewhere he'd never know, reading the words off a screen and deciding something about what was possible. Buck had said, "The most important technical decision I've made isn't an algorithm. It's us asking for help," he'd said. Someone showed up and said, "Show me what you have." As if what you have is worth seeing. He looked at his family, whispered it to himself. Not for anyone else, not for a room or a record, just for himself in the quiet of a Wednesday evening in a city that had always been his and had finally become his home. I didn't change the world. A pause. Aaron shifted in the carrier without waking, but I changed my corner of it. Jessica's hand moved on his chest, pressing slightly, like she'd heard, like she was answering without words, and maybe that was everything, and maybe it was enough, and maybe. As Lily had explained about Lego towers on a living room floor months before any of this had a name, like complete authority of someone who had built and rebuilt many things and understood what held them. Maybe the flat pieces were the whole point, the ones that weren't visible, the ones that weren't interesting, the ones you laid down first, like when they were boring, because without them nothing above them would ever stand.